Hello. Bridget, can you hear me? Wanted to do a sound check real quick before we get started. Is that coming across? Hopefully everybody can hear me. Couple of things I wanted to say, so I'm gonna get started um, on the two things I wanted to say before we actually get to 7 o'clock, where we'll start the book review. First, I want to make sure that everybody understands that what everybody is anticipating coming out with the Jeffrey Epstein, no video. Alright, let's see. Camera, FaceTime, audio. Hello? So, Bridget, do you think that's on your end where you can't hear me? Okay, so Wild Bird, you can hear me? Alright, so we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna tell Bridget what she always tells me, "Restart your computer." Um, okay, good. So I wanna say first that the Jeffrey Epstein, uh, list that everybody keeps talking about is not a list of people that went to the island. It's nothing that people keep saying that it is. Brian Cates has been very, outspoken about the fact that it's when you have trials, you have things like the list of conspirators or unindicted co-conspirators or people that are involved in the lawsuit that may or may not have testified, that they put statements in or gave character references or whatever. That's the list. The list isn't people that went to the island. People keep throwing out that flight log. That flight log's been out for years. So, it is a remnant of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that was sealed. What to me, the more interesting question is, why was it sealed? Were there other actions going on using the names on that list that we're not privy to? They don't normally just seal something like that and then a couple of years later come out and go, "Okay, now y'all can have it." So, that's kind of the interesting thing to me. Also, we learned today that the Harvard president, decided to resign. And I'm gonna say this for all of my friends, all of the people that have worked for me over the years that are Black females, all of the discussion around this whole subject to me is appalling. It's disgusting. And that Mark Lamont Hill coming out and saying that there has to be another Black female, to replace her is garbage. It's a perpetuation of racism, and when you have people that happen to be Black and happen to be female, and they also happen to be highly incompetent, and they are placed in positions of authority, like the Harvard presidency, and they're incompetent, kind of like the press secretary, it implies that the only way a Black female can get into a position like that is to be a DEI hire, and that's disgusting. The people that I had working for me that happened to be Black and female were some of the most outstanding people I've ever met in my life, and I still keep in contact with. And it just disgusts me knowing what brilliant people they were, hardworking they were, that me, if I was a racist and I could not openly discriminate against blacks any longer, what's the next best way to smear an entire population or race than to take the weakest among them, put them in a highly, uh, coveted position, and watch them flounder, watch them be ridiculed, and it implies the unspoken part of that is she couldn't have gotten there without DEI. Okay, so that's bad. So let's not keep doing it. Anyway, just very frustrating to me, especially someone like myself who I I saw the good and the bad in forcing gender. I'm I laughingly say all the time that the only good thing Jimmy Carter did in 4 years was allow females into aircraft maintenance in the Air Force, and I only half mean that because the majority of the females that came through initially sucked, and there was 3 of us that went through in my class. The other 2 were about as mechanically inclined as a mouse. They couldn't carry their toolbox, and one of the people when I went out to, another assignment, um, TDY, one of the girls I was a tech school instructor as well in aircraft maintenance. One of the girls that came through the class when I was an instructor, we were not allowed to eliminate them even though there was no way they could work on an airplane because they wanted this forced integration. So people like me who grew up working on my dad's semi truck and could do anything on a diesel engine and loved being in aircraft maintenance and could do literally anything, were made to look bad because this chick, when I went TDY, was running the snack bar. And the problem, because nobody would let her touch the airplane, she was so incompetent. One of the detriments of that, there's many, one of them is it was a staff base. They didn't have enough maintainers. Everybody was on 12-hour shifts, and you're now 1 person down, but you'll never get a replacement because she's still on your manning documents. So, the guys had to work harder and longer to make up for this chick running the snack bar, and that just pissed me off to no end. Um, so when I got back to the school, I ended up having to go stand in front of the female colonel and explain to her why I would not pass somebody in a practical exam on the trainers who couldn't troubleshoot, they nothing, it was another female, and I was just not gonna do it. I got in a lot of trouble, but it didn't hurt me overall, but it was very uncomfortable, and it's just dumb to do it, and I have firsthand experience on how dumb it is. Alright, let's get into chapter 14, The Dark Side of Wexner's Philanthropic Opportunity. So, Wexner I want y'all to start thinking in a big frame of reference as we go through this, next couple of chapters. There's something really dark going on with this, and please don't, fill up the chat box with, good Jewish people versus bad Jewish people. I don't even like, going down that road. There's something going on with these organizations um, that Wexner and Hodman and the rest of these people, the Fisher guy, they're doing something besides being businessmen. They're setting up Jeffrey Epstein. He's living at some point at Harvard. Um, they know he's recruiting underage people. They know he's blackmailing people. They're in bed with Mossad. They're in bed with the CIA. So we need to keep the big picture, the 30,000 foot of all of these organizations that they touch, all of the NGOs that they touch, and the people in government that they touch. Because where we've been from, and for those of you who may be new, we have well established that the mafia, mobsters, the actors, the government, the industrialists in the World War I, World War II timeframe all collude. That's how we come up with the name international syndicate. It's one big ball of worms. And that all we did when we stood up the CIA is we put this ball of worms under the government umbrella. So now all they do is stamp, national security on it. They never have to worry about going to jail. They never have to worry about anybody listening in on them. They never have to worry about looking over their shoulders unless it's one of their own that's gonna knock them off. They're never going to, see the inside of a courtroom because all they do anytime Congress does a congressional inquiry is they stamp national security on it and they tuck their tail and run. So, I want y'all to keep all of that in mind when we, dig down into, uh, these people for the rest of this book, because it's gonna be very important. Okay, so we talked about Arthur Shapiro's murder, in our last segment. So, his murder was also the year that Leslie Wexner became a billionaire and began to build up his public persona. The New York Magazine profile, which was a cover story in August 1985 issue entitled "The Bachelor Billionaire: On Pins and Needles with Leslie Wexner." That's the name of the article. It had him as a middle-aged, grinning, embracing friends, blah, 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 praised for his business dealings, saying how tender and gentle he was. He had a great personality, blah, blah, blah. So, what's interesting about that, in Jewish language, literally pins or spikes in Yiddish and often used to describe nervous energy or impatience or in anxiety. Wexner personified anxiety. His decision to use uh, the word, uh, "debut," which, um, is, he excuse me, Wexner uses that word throughout the article, and it's quite significant. I'll spell it, Dybbuk. Also notable is how Wexner goes on to describe this apparent entity throughout the article and his intimate relationship with it. A debut is a Jewish folklore term for a disembodied human spirit. Because of former sins, it wanders restlessly until it finds a haven in the body of a living person. The debut is almost always considered to be malicious, which leads to the transition in English as demon. Julie Baumgard describes, Les Wexner's debut just a second, as the demon that always wakes up in the morning with Wexner and tweaks and pulls at him. Wexner could have easily chosen to frame the entity as a righteous spirit, which is a Magid, Magid, or as his righteous ancestor, which is Ibbur, guiding his life, but he did not. He chose this particular term, which says a lot about him, who has since used his billions to shape both mainstream Jewish identity and leadership in both the US and Israel for decades. And the other thing that I wanna say, if y'all haven't read my article on Zionism, what gets mixed up is because and uh, Liz is kind of my go-to person for this, on Jewish being a noun versus a verb versus a whatever. Um, there is a distinct difference between Judaism in its traditional form and Zionism. And if you don't know anything about Zionism, I'd recommend going to my Substack. It's linked on both, X and True Social, and read that article on Zionism. It was an eye opener for me, and I had, um, one of the Jewish ladies that follows me on True Social, read over it to make sure that it was emphatically correct in the references that I, found. So, I just wanna make that point. It states that Wexner has, uh, been with the Duke or demon since he was a boy and that his father had recognized it and referred to it as a churning. That almost sounds like a sci-fi movie. The Duke causes him to feel molten and constantly pricked by spiritual pins and needles. It apparently left him at some point, but it returned in 1977 when he was 40, half frozen during an ill-fated trip to a mountain near his vacation home in Vail. On this specific trip, Wexner says he both rejoined with his childhood Duke and decided to change his life. New York Magazine said that it makes him wander from house to house, wanting more and more, swallowing companies larger than his own. It compels him to accumulate more and more power with no end in sight. It also is said that it's part of his genius or greed. Wexner further describes it as keeping him out of balance, emotionally stunted, a part of him, the precious treasured boy son part lagging behind the demon. So in that article, it first defines the term as a demon that clings, um oh, another article that was written in the Jewish Chronicle defines that term as a demon clinging to a person's soul, and then, quote, "The Hebrew verb from which the word dabuk is derived is also used to describe the cleansing, the clear whoa, the cleaving of a pious soul to God. The two states are mirror images of each other. Entity dwelling within him, the entity, the demon, is dominant, while his actual self and soul lag behind and is stunted, causing him to identify more with the entity than with himself. That's some heavy stuff. And he actually talks about it, in an article in the New York Magazine. Quote, Les Wexner picks up his heavy case and flies off to his in his Challenger with his demon sitting next to him, taunting and poking him with impatience. That little demon he really loves. The demon turns his face. What does he look like? And then quoted is Les Wexner saying, "He looks like me." Yeah. There is a strong possibility that Wexner suffers from some sort of mental disorder that causes him to have basically a dual personality. The piece weaves Wexner's demon throughout the piece that seeks to praise his business acumen above all else. Is the okay. Whether it's real or imagined, the fact that Wexner, in the years before and after this article was published, has had a massive impact on the Jewish community in the US through his, uh, philanthropy. The Wexner Foundation saw Wexner mold generations of Jewish leaders through the Wexner Foundation programs, while others, such as the Mega Group, the Organized Crime Link, let Wexner joined by several other open-minded billionaires, which also boast considerable criminal connections. The relationship of the American Jewish community, as well as the US government, to the state of Israel. And that's really one of the highlights of this whole thing is how this, connects to the government of Israel and to Mossad. So, on the Wexner's Foundation website, it clearly says that the foundation was set up in '83 alongside with Wexner Heritage Foundation. So that's 2. The 2001 obituary of his mother, Bella, says that they started it in 1973, not '83. Bella became the secretary of the foundation just as she had been the secretary of his company. Wexner wanted people to refer to it as a joint philanthropy. The foundation's website states its original purpose was to assist emerging professional Jewish leaders in North America and mid-career public officials in Israel. So, government of Israel connecting with businessmen, Jewish leaders in America. That's the purpose of this foundation. This foundation will have hundreds of millions of dollars eventually donated to it to match the government of Israel to leading is, Jewish people, business leaders in America. The main endeavor were created after Wexner reached the conclusion that Jewish people needed most what they needed most at the moment during this time was strong leadership. Wexner sought to focus his foundation's attention chiefly on the development of leaders, in quote, "development of leaders." He developed programs that molded the minds and opinions of prominent North American, as well as Israeli, Jewish leaders who went on to work at top levels of finance, government, and intelligence. So, can you spell grooming? Wexner's Foundation's original advisors included Robert Hiller, who had previously been executive vice president of the uh, Council of Jewish Federation and the Welfare Fund. Robert Hiller was described in an article in the Baltimore Sun as a nonprofit leader who helped develop community fundraising strategies and was active in the Soviet Jewry movement, as well as being a community development leader, like a community organizer. Hiller was also an executive at Community Chest of Metropolitan Detroit in 1948. Miller helped bring together corporations such as General Motors to create social service groups under an umbrella called Collective Fundraising Efforts Today. In 1950, He was the associate director of a Jewish community federation in Cleveland. 6 years later, he joined the U.S. Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, where he would spend another 9 years in the position before he moves to Baltimore. So, 48, he's in Detroit, 50, he's in Cleveland, 56, he's in Pittsburgh, and 65, he's in Baltimore. Now, I'm going to point out the obvious here based on all of the research we've done. Every one of those places is a hotbed for organized crime, just stating the obvious. I had pictures of every let's see, in Hiller's book, it said, "I had pictures of every Israeli prime minister from David Ben-Gurion to Menachem Begin." I would have many more with Begin because he was the current prime minister. My favorite picture was taken in Washington, DC at a gala where his wife been hit um, he and his wife were with Ambassador Yitzhak Rabin and his wife, Leah. That was his most prized possession. Hiller was proactive when it came to seating suitable high-ranking candidates for prominent positions in Jewish community organizations, a task that Wexner Foundation would later reproduce on a grand scale. So again, this is um, a national Jewish community organizing. These guys are doing what Obama did in Chicago. They are doing it on a national scale with only Jewish people. One example of matchmaking was the appointment of Larry Moses, assistant to Rabbi Maurice Corson. Corson is credited as co-founding the Wexner Foundation with Lex Wexner in 1983. After Corson left that post, Moses stepped in to serve as the foundation's president. Hiller wrote in his autobiography that he had personally enticed Moses to become Rabbi Corson's assistant, and this later resulted in Moses becoming the executive vice president of the Wexner Foundation. When Hiller was 33, he was presented with an opportunity to be a member of what they called Big 16, which was classed as an informal grouping of 16 of the largest communities in North America, headed by prominent Jewish executive members. Of the people who Hiller connected with the Wexler Foundation, which was meant to lead to the Big 16 Federation, was Ernst Katelman, Katelman. Katelman declined a prestigious leadership role in order to join Larry Moses, where he became the assistant at the Wexner Foundation. So that's very interesting. That's how prestigious within the Jewish community this Wexner Foundation was. One of the most stimulating relationships, this is according to Hiller, that he had was with Wexner's Foundation of Columbus, Ohio, and New York City. This is what he's saying when he's, like, thinking about his life. Rabbi Morris Corson was the foundation's president, and Hiller's relationship with him started in Baltimore, where he had been a new rabbi for the city's largest conservative synagogue. He came from Philadelphia with an interesting background and credentials, Hiller said. He goes on to write that Corson, however, seemed bored and uneasy with the routine of a synagogue rabbi. So Hiller helped him by giving him an executive position at United Israel Appeal of Canada. He did so well there that he was recruited to come back to the United States in an executive position at the International B'nai B'rith Secret Society, which is a Jewish fraternity, secret society. Wexner met him through his work with B'nai B'rith. Rabbi Corson, as the chief executive, B'nai B'rith, the Jewish fraternal organization modeled as a secret society, blah, blah, blah. We've already talked about it. Hiller Hiller went on to assist Corson in the initial stages of setting up the foundation, Wexner's foundation. And Wexner's foundation had a location both in Columbus, Ohio, and New York City, which is also very interesting. And Hiller uh, described it as an unusual foundation with its own agenda and programming. Hiller retired from his consultancy role and was replaced by Philip Bernstein, the former executive of the Council of Jewish Federations and Welfare Funds. Huh. Orson was also a very prominent Jewish educator at the time, the rabbi. He was ordained a rabbi in 1960 through the Jewish Theological Seminary after studying at the University of Cincinnati, where he graduated in 1955. In '64, Corson had become the president of the Religious Education Society in Seattle. So he stayed there until '66. Then he began working for the Zionist Organization of America. He became the senior rabbi at the a Zionist congregation between '76 and '79. Hiller helped Corson get the executive position at the United Israel Appeal of Canada, and then, as we just said, he came back just after a year to join the B'nai B'rith. Corson worked as Director of Development at B'nai B'rith International in New York City for 5 years from '80 to '85. It was during this period that the board, that oversees B'nai B'rith included Edmund Safra, Edgar Bronfman, and Max Fisher. Now, remember, Safra is the guy that was basically trying to steal all the shit out of Russia and got burned up in his house. Edgar Bronfman is of the Bronfman clan from Canada that was running all the bootlegged whiskey and in bed with the mafia. And Max Fisher is the guy from Detroit that basically sold all of the people. Well, he has Bob connections too, but he's the one that, was involved in real estate and sold, uh basically created a group that said, "Hey, we're gonna do all these wonderful things for downtown Detroit, and we're gonna buy up all this property that happened to belong to a bunch of, black families," and then he built high-rise apartment buildings that none of the black people could afford. So, not a good guy. So, he's at Benaiah Barath at the same time all of these people are members. Okay, now where am I at? So, the original advisory board of the Wexner Foundation, another guy was Charles Liebman, Liebman. Liebman. He was born in New York City in 1934. He was influential Jewish political scientist. He had a career teaching at Bar Ilan University, Bardash Ilan. He was born into a self-described Zionist family, and Libman had published his seminal work, quote, "Orthodoxy in American Life," unquote. The paper often referred to Libman's pioneering essay that was acclaimed throughout the Jewish community. In 1983, the year that Wexman's Foundation was created, Libman was preparing to publish his most controversial work, Extremism as a Religious Norm. In this paper, Libman analyzed religious extremism in Israel and argued that religion extremism is the norm and that it is not religious extremism, but religious moderation that requires an explanation. Since religious commitment is a total commitment and the behavior it elicits by definition moral behavior, religious adherence becomes a criteria by which other people can be evaluated. The religiously committed individual will experience moral repugnance in associating with the non-religious. It was basically criticized as an attempt to excuse and justify extremism on the Jewish side, which, as we will later see, we have an entire industry of PR people that people hire to tell them how to talk to avoid this very thing. It's not that they don't believe it, you're just not allowed to say it out loud. So, we will talk later on about some of the PR companies like the Gray, Shades of Grey guy that we went through. They hire these PR companies, they test words to use, so you and I are manipulated. So when events happen like October 7th, our gut reaction based on the programming that we've been provided, thanks to these guys, is to say one side's very extreme and the other side is not extreme at all. But in actuality, there is extremism, and I'm not equating the 2, but there are extremism on both sides. This guy was very well thought of. He is very high up in the pecking order in the Zionist version of Judaism, and the only criticism they had of this guy saying this is that you're not supposed to say it out loud. He was later lauded as the preeminent social scientist of Jews and Judaism in the latter third of the 20th century. Libman was awarded the Israel Prize for Government Studies, and then in September of that same year, he passed away, which is 2003. Another key figure is Rabbi Herbert Friedman that was involved in the foundation. Friedman is clearly listed as the co-founder of the foundation and had served in as its president for a decade. The Wexner Heritage Foundation, for its website, was created to, quote, "strengthen volunteer leaders in North American Jewish community," unquote. It spawned a program called Wexner Heritage Program. And what's interesting about this one is they kept getting younger and younger and younger. This provided young Jewish volunteer leaders with a 2-year intensive Jewish learning program, another grooming opportunity. Or their objectives were to understand Jewish history, values, text, and enriching their leadership skills. Friedman The rabbi was a US Army chaplain during World War II. He was an advisor to General Lucius Clay, the commander of American occupation forces in Germany, which is when they were doing Operation Gladio. He was recruited oh, poor Bridget. He was recruited by David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, to join a paramilitary group, Haganah, which is basically Israel's version of Gladio. The Haganah was the precursor to the Israeli military, but when it was not the Israeli military, it had links to organized crime. As a member of the Haganah, Rabbi Friedman participated in the Aliyah Bet, which was the illegal transportation of European Jews to Palestine before it was a state. So there when it was a British, protectorate, there were to not disrupt the because it wasn't a state, still Palestine at the time. There was a limited number of people that could migrate that were Jewish because of the balance of the Christians versus Muslim versus Jewish people that were living peacefully in Palestine at the time. So, to not upset the apple cart before it became a state because it had been being planned to be a state for a long time. They while it was in British, protectorate, they capped the number of people that could come to, Israel to live that were Jewish. And the Haganah had set up a illegal migration program where they were sneaking people in, kinda like the well, not quite, but illegal immigration nonetheless. United Jewish Appeal, UJA, um, from '54 to '71, Friedman was the chief executive of it, the United Jewish Appeal. In that role, he raised more than $3 billion to support the state of Israel from '54 to '71, $3 billion. During that period, the United Jewish Appeal was intimately involved in relaunching the Jewish Agency by Wexner's mentor, Max Fisher, in 1970 in the United States. So Fisher was involved in the United Jewish Appeal as well. Wexner was one of the largest individual contributors to the United Jewish Appeal in America. And after creating the Wexner Heritage Foundation with Friedman, Wexner became its vice chairman in the United States. So while he was in that position, he had a lot of closed door meetings with high level Israeli leadership and supposedly about, uh, philanthropy, but also he discussed things about his business, whatever his business happened to be. Um, so he was working with his company, The Limited, to establish factories in the occupied Golan Heights. So, you know how when anytime Israel takes over territory, it becomes very controversial, regardless of how they get it. And so one of the roles that Wexner was playing is whenever they did take over territory, organizing businessmen to go in and build, companies there to make the occupancy more permanent. Wexner Foundation had direct and controversial ties to at least one former Israeli head of state, Ignat I don't know how you say his first name, Ehud, Barak. So we've talked about him before, and he has direct ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Barak does, of his own, outside of Wexner. Barak's ties to Wexner Founda this is a quote out of a newspaper article. Barak's ties to the Wexner Foundation became an issue only after the right-wing journalist Urel Siegel called last October to investigate the $2.3 million research grant Barack received from the Wexner Foundation, which has in turn for years been the beneficiary of Epstein's financial contributions. Accordingly, according to Siegel, the grant under question was given to Barack from 2004 to 2006 when he held no public position. Barack insisted he had no authority to disclose details about this grant, that only the Wexner Foundation can, who chose to be quiet about it. So, this is very interesting because you have Jeffrey Epstein, who's getting money from somewhere, i.e., blackmail, and he's funneling a ton of this money into these foundations. These foundations are giving money to political people in Israel. Was he buying them? Wexner's Heritage Program planned to connect American Jews with an ever-expanding nation-state of Israel. Quote, "Expand the vision of Jewish volunteer leaders and deepen their Jewish knowledge." Another quote, "Essentially a Jewish learning and leadership development program for volunteers in North America." There has been over 2,000 leaders that has been put through this program, and it goes on to talk about a little bit about the program, about evening seminars, there's in-residence short-term summer, residence camp and trips to Israel. It's a well-founded leadership program such as the World Economic Forum Young Global Leadership Program. The Wexner program targets a specific age group of 30 to 45. So, just so that you know, this is how they pick the winners and losers. These are grooming programs. Um, some of the people involved, 70 Faces Media, the Foundation for Jewish Camp, International Hillel, Hillel, AIPAC, Salam Hartman Institute, Hadar, other rabbi-affiliated seminaries, a thing called the Jewish Education Project, Prisma, that's just naming some, but all of those entities get money and, ask for submissions for leadership, uh, candidates to go through this program from all of those organizations. They're all kinda wrapped together. So, the Wexner Foundation had especially close ties with the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the AIPAC, and again, that's where the whole PR thing comes in. Elliot Brandt, who was the national managing director, an alumni of Wexner's Heritage Program, in a 2018 speech said that, quote, "Most of the AIPAC national board consists of Wexner Heritage alumni." That's why they do it. They are shaping and controlling everything through programs like this. Wexner's close ties to AIPAC takes on several different shades. Not only his close association with Israeli intelligence connected Jeffrey Epstein, but also the fact that AIPAC itself has long-standing and controversial ties to Israeli intelligence. AIPAC was at the center of an Israeli espionage scandal in the United States in the mid-80s, as well as again in 2004 when a high-ranking Pentagon analyst was caught passing highly classified information over to Israel's government via people in AIPAC. AIPAC, um, itself avoided being charged directly, but, quote, "The DOJ chief prosecutor on the AIPAC espionage case, Paul McCulty, was suddenly and inexplicably promoted within the DOJ after he backed off on criminally indicting AIPAC as a corporation. The charges against the specific AIPAC officials involved were also dropped." Years after the Wexner Heritage Program was launched, in 1987, the Wexner Foundation announced that it would begin channeling $3 to $4 million in grant per year, dedicated programs enhancement and improvement of professional leadership within the Jewish community. Crazy. So, the Jewish Telegraph Agency is quoted as saying, "Wexner said an advisory group drawn from among leading Jewish academics and communal professionals recommended that attention be focused on 3 critical groups: rabbis, communal professionals, and educators. These efforts would result in the formal creation of another program called Wexner Graduate Fellowship in 1988. Chairmanship of this group was given to Henry Rosovsky, Rosovsky. Henry was an economist at Harvard. This is gonna be important. Rosovsky was born to Russian Jewish parents. He served in the Counterintelligence Corps of the US Army. Now, y'all will remember when we were going through the whole West Germany OSS, how that turned into Gladio. The Counterintelligence Corps, the CIC, was kind of the dueling entity with the OSS in, um, competing intelligence work. So that's where this guy comes from. He gets a degree from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and a PhD from Harvard. Rosofsky taught overseas as a visiting professor in Tokyo. He was at the University of California, Berkeley. He taught at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. He was a consultant to the US government, the Asian Development Bank, and the World Bank, and UNESCO, which UNESCO has ties to the CIA. So does the World Bank, by the way. And the Asian Development Bank is part well, we'll save that for later. There's a tie there too. Rosofsky had helped to establish the Center for Jewish Studies, which was led by Harry Wolfson in 1978. Wolfson was the first chairman of the Jewish Studies at the Center of the American College. oh, studies at any American college. So he was a big guy in the, creation of kind of the Judaism courses throughout colleges in the United States. Rosofsky was the first Jew to serve on the board of the Harvard Corporation. And keep in mind the Harvard Corporation we came to learn a lot about since the fiasco with Harvard right now. Funny how going through this book is like living real time, right? So many of the topics in this book is literally playing out in front of us. Rosofsky's wife, Nitza Rosofsky, also was at Harvard, and in '86, during Harvard's 350th anniversary, she wrote a piece called "The Jewish Experience at Harvard and Radcliffe," which traced Jewish history at the university dating back to the 1720s. Rosofsky developed a close relationship with many of the people at Harvard, including US Treasury Secretary and Harvard President Larry Summers. Quote, "35 years ago, I sat in your office as a young recruit to the Harvard faculty. I was trembling with the majesty of it all. Over time, I became less intimidated and came to value your wisdom and your experience." That's what Summers was saying to Rosofsky. That's sick. Trembling at the ma majesty of it all. I had a lot of experiences, none of them were trembling. Rosofsky became involved with the Wexner Foundation in 1987, because of course he did. He was part of the recruit, support, and retain the highest quality professional leadership and was involved in the grant making. So, individual grants were awarded at the Wexner Foundation fellowships, and the foundation appointed Rosofsky to serve as the chairman of the fellowship committee. So he's gonna be the guy writing the checks. Rosofsky, had connections to Israeli politicians like Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin, and let's see, another one of Wexner's, developments was called the American Academy of Achievement. So, Rosofsky, most importantly, were likely of interest to Wexner was his strong connection with Harvard Hillel, Hillel. It's now referred to as Harvard Radcliffe Hillel. It's a service organization that provides Jewish educational, cultural, religious, and social opportunities for students and faculties. The Hillel's relocation from a simple house at the outskirts of campus to a location in the heart of the campus was part of, Rosofsky's mission at, um, Harvard. Wexner's subsequent involvement with this house would also mark Epstein's own entry into what would become controversial, intimate relationships with the prestigious university, because he's gonna be at the heart of this. Epstein's, um, donations to the university, to Harvard, it said in an article, Rosofsky was not only one of Epstein's closest associates at Harvard, but it was also Epstein's oldest friend of the bunch, having been introduced to Rosofsky by Wexner around 1991. That is notable because it's the same year that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell began their sexual blackmail sex trafficking operation. So, keep in mind 1991, 'cause it comes up a few times. Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell starts blackmail sex trafficking operation, and, Rosofsky and Epstein are introduced in 1991. I have a sneaking opinion that all this stuff is connected, um, and on purpose. So, you set up things to look good and novel and have an innocent but behind the scenes, isn't it just as conceivable that all of these people that you're setting up these grooming opportunities for, it's really basically just to induct them into a spying apparatus for Israel? I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying it is absolutely completely plausible that that's what's going on. Is if this operation was set up for any other country besides Israel, it would be the first thing you would think of. If all of these people were Chinese, hello? We've been brainwashed. Okay. In 1991, there was also a New York Times report that 4 donors, among them Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein, had pledged to raise $2,000,000 for the construction of this new student center that was gonna be moved to the heart of campus. In the article, it lists Epstein as the president of Wexner Investment Company. The building was completed in 1994 and named the Rosofsky Hall in Henry Rosofsky's honor. It ended up being a 19,500 square foot building and cost $3,000,000 to finish. It had a courtyard, a student lounge, a dining hall, a library, offices, multipurpose rooms, worship area, meeting areas. After the 2019 arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, Hillel executive director, Rabbi Jonah Steinberg, claimed that Epstein had merely facilitated a gift that was actually donated by the Wexners and did not involve Epstein's personal money. However, a now absent plaque on the building, cited by the Harvard Crimson in 2003, named both Epstein and Wexner as donators. So that's a big fat lie. Steinberg did note that Epstein donated $50,000 to Hillel in 1991. Records from the Harvard Alumni Affairs and Development revere that excuse me, reveal that Epstein was courted as a donator, um, by several senior leaders seeking his support, and that his first official donation was in 1998. But keep in mind that we just read that Epstein had donated a ton of his money to the foundation that's funding the entire building of the building. And Epstein, remember, was signing everything, he had a power of attorney. When Harvard moved to reject donations from Epstein following his 2008 conviction, Epstein continued to donate indirectly to the university by directly sponsoring several professors as well as student social clubs at Harvard. So even when he wasn't giving, he was giving. Gotta love it. Epstein's first official donation to Harvard in 1998 was the same year that he was using his private plane, best known now as the Lolita Express, to transport Larry Summers, who was at the time the deputy Treasury Secretary. Larry Summers' then boss was Treasury Secretary Richard Rubin. He had previously facilitated Epstein's first official visit to the Clinton White House in early 1993. Summers would become president at Harvard shortly after the conclusion of the Clinton administration. Epstein's access to Harvard campus and many of its most notable professors increased exponentially while president of Harvard Summers continued to fly around on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. How you like those apples? So, Wexner also, increased his donations, and even before they made the donation in 1991 for the moving of that building, Wexner's development of leaders had become entangled with Harvard University already. In 1989, the year after Wexner Graduate Fellowship was created, Wexner's Israel Fellowship Program was created that specifically said 10 outstanding Israeli public officials earning their mid-career master's degree in program administration at the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, I'm gonna point out something here. Y'all have we've talked about the implications of JFK's assassination and how both the CIA and Mossad was involved in that. I want y'all just for a second to consider the irony of Wexner and Epstein setting up this program at Harvard Kennedy's school. Nothing like poking somebody in the eye. The goal of the fellowship is to provide Israel's next generation of public leaders with advanced leadership and public management training. More than 280 Israeli public officials have participated in this Israel Fellowship. So this is the part where they're bringing Israeli government officials over to send them to a 2 year master's degree, and Wexner's foundation is picking up the tab, not the government of Israel. That's not even allowed here, by the way. Director General of Public Administrations, generals, commanders of the Israeli military, and top advisors to the military prime or the Israeli prime minister all have participated in this program. They have to commit to returning to Israel and staying in the government for 3 more years so they can be of use to them. Um It it's noted that Wexner's interest in having this program be hosted at Harvard's Kennedy School is the quality of the international exposure it permits. I think it's still a poke in the eye. Okay, because obviously that school is used by all of the military. It's one of the highest honors that senior officers in the military can be picked up to go to that school. It's a very big deal. So, it's again a way of them the strings attached. How many people can we get dirty? How many people can we force being put together so we can manipulate everything? Among the 10 alumni of the first class of Wexner's Israel Fellowship is Shay Avital, Avital, a prominent leader figure in the Israeli military who had first served under Benjamin Netanyahu's brother Yoni Netanyahu. Another alumni a guy by the last name of Armoni, Armoni, former special advisor to Teddy Kollek, Kollek, as well as Israeli prime ministers. He was advisors to both. Another guy, Moshe Lador, Lador, former Israeli state prosecutor. A Rick Raz, the first name is Arik, last name Raz. He's the former governor of one of Israel's major regions. Guy by the last name of Vogelman, who was the justice on Israel's Supreme Court. Eduardo Gorin, a Chilean economist who had played a major role in managing the Chile's copper mining industry, which is the largest one in the world. Yossi uh, Tamir, Director General of the JDC Israel and leading globalist Jewish humanitarian organization. Other interesting alumni, Amos Slyper, Slyper, who is the Deputy Director General of the State Comptroller's Office in Israel, money guy. Um, During Slyper's tenure as the comptroller, the legal advisor to that office was Norit Israeli, an alumnus of the second class of Wexner's Israel Fellows. Given that Wexner considerable clout with a prominent Israeli in major positions in all of the government and all of the industry in Israel. So then we add another program, Wexner's Senior Leaders Program, which leverages the training and scholarship of the Harvard Kennedy School to strengthen Israel's public service and spur innovation. It seeks applicants from the senior level positions of Israel public service sector, including civil service, local governments, government agencies, and their security forces. Even before the 1991 donation by Wexner and Epstein, he was actively involved in bringing prominent Israelis, many with careers in the national security apparatus of Israel, to Harvard Kennedy School. Wexner became one of the guiding forces behind the school and giving it an even greater influence on the development of leaders at the institution. Shortly before Larry Summers became Harvard president, Les Wexner, via the Wexner Foundation, funded the creation of the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership. The Center for Public Leadership was defined as a premier training ground for emerging public leaders in the United States. Oh, glad to have you back, Bridget. Um, the longtime director of this Center for Public Leadership is David Gergen, Gergen. He was an advisor to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. Gergen was the speechwriter for William Simon, whose ties to the Covenant House and America Cares, both child trafficking networks. Gergen was also a parallel career in journalism. He was the chief editor of US News& and World Report. He worked with Mort Zuckerman, and Zuckerman is a very close associate of Epstein's. Zuckerman bought the New York Daily News after the death of Robert Maxwell. Bergen is also a longtime member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, where Epstein had memberships on both of those as well. Wexner's contributions to Harvard's Center for Public Leadership reached $20 million by 2006, and totaled $42 million by 2012. What's notable during this period is that Jeffrey Epstein, Wexner's closest associate until they parted, between 2007 and 2008, was also making his rounds at Harvard. In 2006, when Wexner announced the additional donation of almost $7 million to the center, Gergen was quoted by the Harvard Crimson saying, quote, "It has been a great personal privilege to work with Les and Abigail Wexner over the past half dozen years at the university and beyond, and beyond. They are both leaders in their own right, people of vision, imagination, and keen dedication to advancing the quality of public life. They have been wonderful partners." In 2014, Bergen participated in Wexner's Foundation's 30th anniversary ball, hosting a session where he interviewed former Israeli, Shimon Peres at length, because, they know everybody. Epstein's Before Epstein's second arrest, Wexner's dominated, uh, Harvard School saw Epstein's associate like Glenn Dubin and Leon Black creep into the top leadership bodies of the organization. Glenn Dubin had been a member of the Harvard School's advisory council, which Leslie and Abigail Wexner co-chaired. Wexner and Dubin were pressured to remove themselves from the council after Epstein's second arrest and subsequent death. They left in February 2020. At the time, it was noted that the chief of staff to then Harvard president La Lawrence, uh, Bacow was Patricia Bellinger. She had been added to the board of directors of Wexner's L Brands, which is the name for the limited. Huh. So, they're intermixing staff from Harvard with, Wexner's company. Dubin It makes plotting easier when you do that. Dubin had been named in court documents as one of the men Virginia Jeffries was forced to have sex with when she was under Epstein's control, with another being Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, a former manager of the Dubin household. Ronaldo Rizzo recounted his encounter with the 15-year-old girl allegedly trafficked by Epstein, who was brought to the Dubin's house in 2005. In 2010, Dubin had donated $5 million to the uh, Wexler School at Harvard to create his own fellowship aimed at developing leaders, called the Dubin Graduate Fellowships for Emerging Leaders. Was he blackmailed? What the heck? Leon Black of Apollo Global Management, whose philanthropic family foundation was also managed by Epstein for years, was on this Harvard School's leadership council. Black, however, did not resign his post after Epstein's scandal became a concern. Wexner and Dubin had left their positions on the advisory council. Black's connections to Epstein resulted in considerable media scrutiny, as well as an internal investigation by Apollo. As of 2022, Black is no longer listed on the Harvard School's website as a member of its leadership council. Wexner's funded Harvard School to in 2006, there was plans for his school at Harvard to team up with the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leadership Program. Surprise! Public-private partnerships on a global scale originally created what would become the Young Global Leadership Program in 1992 under the name of Global Leaders of Tomorrow. It was rebranded to the Young Global Leadership Program in 2004. In recent years, the forum and its Young Global Leadership Program has become infamous in some circles for clips of Klaus Schwab as follows, quote, "I have to say, then I mention names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin, and so on. They all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are really proud of now, with the young generation like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinet. It is true in Argentina, it is true in France now, dot, dot, dot." That clip from 2017 between Klaus Schwab and the Harvard School David Gergen. It took place at the Harvard Kennedy School. The close ties between Harvard Kennedy School and the World Economic Forum are highlighted, and it's also mentioned that the Young Global Leader participants are also present and attending the Harvard Kennedy School for an executive session. Durkin, in addition to all of his other roles, is also formerly a board member of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, which Klaus Schwab co-founded with his wife in 1998. He is also an agenda contributor to the World Economic Forum. The Harvard School began hosting the executive session for young global leader participants in order to allow for their access to have a greater opportunity to form personal connections and bonds that will encourage opportunities. These executive sessions were designed and hosted by the Kennedy School of Government, and a significant amount of the funds raised were connected to the Clinton Global Initiative. In 2007, Epstein defense lawyers claimed that Epstein had played a major role in developing the global Clinton Global Initiative, writing to federal prosecutors that Mr. Epstein was a part of the original group that conceived of the idea, which it described as a project bringing together a community of global leaders to devise and implement innovative solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges. And let me just suggest to you that uh, world's most pressing challenges is getting rid of all of us. At the time, the executive director of the Harvard School, working under David Gergen, was Betsy Myers, a former senior advisor to President Clinton, specifically on women's issues. Meyer also played a critical role in Clinton's reelection effort in 1996. Klaus Schwab, now infamous, uh, penetrate the cabinet quote, may offer an insight into Les Wexner's own interest in the decades over developing these leadership for the Jewish community. With nearly 40 years focused specifically on training men and women to influence American Jewish society, Israel's government and private sector, ideas and policies that benefit Wexner both personally and professionally has been instilled in generations of leaders and influencers. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy with the demon, okay? We started off this chapter. This is a guy haunted by a demon, and he's doing all of this crap. Wexner's foray into becoming one of the main donors of Harvard Kennedy School allows for much of the same to occur across the globe. And we're worried about the World Economic Forum over here, people. There's so much bigger fish to fry. Anytime a organization like the World Economic Forum gets all of this attention, you know there's something that's going completely unlooked at. I'm going to argue it's this, and Whitney Webb does a great job of highlighting that. So, obviously, this is a massive influence operation, which paralleled Epstein's own blackmail influence operation. It and speculating as to why he would want to mold the powerful and soon to be powerful, it's worth considering Wexner's lesser known connections, including through organized crime, to Jeffrey Epstein, and more will be discussed in a following chapter, to not one but two CIA-linked airlines with his own history of drug and arms trafficking. So we're gonna stop there. The next section in chapter 14 is called the mega group, and it's gonna knock your socks off. It will be very timely. We're gonna do that on Thursday. Um, let's see if we have any questions. Let me move my book out of the way, my computer. Um, so Bridget came back in with carbon that they wanna get rid of. Exactly. Um, so do we have any topics of conversation tonight that anybody wants to, chat about? Um, I think that pretty much, captures what I wanted to talk about. I think it's very important when we discover some of these, um, influence operations that you keep in mind that the second and third order effects of what this is, like, going on since 1991, and the that's why my frustrating thing when you talk to other people about the challenges that Trump had during his 1st term, it's so well illustrated when you go through something like this. We are just literally scraping the top of the barrel. This is one group of people. There's a ton of these groups of people doing things like this, and you have to be able to have all of it mapped out so that whenever you're ready to get them, you have to get all of them. So, that's why it's so, so important to understand the complexity and, again, we're just kinda scraping the surface here. Whitney does a great job of the way she's building this whole the foundation that we've been going through and how all of them are interwoven with the different governments, the different, entities, and the influence operation. But you're going to see, as we get into the mega group, the PR element of it, how they literally have been brainwashing us with particular word choices and particular ways of thinking, and the people that they bring into these programs are the master manipulators. Okay, Tara, I am listening to Operation Gladio, very interesting, plus BJP acquired the Sultan's yacht in '88, makes sense. 91, yeah, um, I love, Tara, that you're taking the opportunity to listen to Operation Gladio. It for all of us, I can speak for all of us, I know. Having gone through and learned about Operation Gladio, it changes your entire perspective of literally the world. Everything's different. You can look at anybody's comments and know exactly what's going on and what they're trying to make you think. So, that was the other thing I was gonna I'll just say real briefly. Today, it comes out that a former CIA guy says that the CIA is going to mess in the 2024 election. How many of y'all read that on True Social or Twitter/X, whatever it is? Have you seen that article? I'm like, "How is that even a news article?" The CIA has literally, since the day it opened its door, been involved in every election. Not one, not the next one, everyone. The only election that they may not be able to physically get involved in on the day of the election is like Argentina's where they use paper ballots. But the very first thing, and you will know this, Tara, since you're reading Operation Gladio, the very first thing they did as a CIA was spent $50,000,000 to affect the outcome of the Italian election in 1948. That's the very first thing they did. That's what they've done for the last 70 years, every election. They have taken out over 50 heads of state. I stopped counting at 50. I'm just like, my mind's blown. I can't even count anymore. And in some countries, they've done it more than once. So y'all know through Operation Condor, they took out basically every country in South America, and some multiple times. They took out JFK. They tried to coup Trump before he was elected during the impeachment with Eric Caramella, CIA guy. The 51 CIA officers signing the letter, they've literally been involved in every election. So, I laughed out loud when I read that. Oh my god, look at the news. They're prepping the ground by saying that. They drop these little hints like, "The CIA is gonna get involved in the next election." Uh, okay. They've been involved in every election. And so then when it happens, they can all say, "Well, we were warned." It just blew my mind. So, yeah, they topple government, um, and then in the aftermath, like in Guatemala, Chile, Argentina, hundreds of thousands of people are murdered. They don't care. They took out the president of Vietnam. They don't care, and then murdered hundreds of thousands of people. Um, so, again, over 50, stop counting, and, um, yeah, that was just literally crazy. And you're right, Tara, you got it, girl. Stamp national security audit, you're not allowed to ask any questions, let's move on. So, we're gonna have our own little, uh, shorthand conversations here from having done all of our research. Love having y'all here. If you're not following the channel, please follow us. We're at 597. So we need to get over 600. That would be awesome as a tribute to Julie and her recovery time. And please give the show a thumbs up if you haven't already, because that helps people find it in search engines on Rumble if they're looking for a particular topic. And appreciate y'all being here, and we will be back here 7 p.m. on Thursday. And thanks for the suggestion of pinning that schedule, that was brilliant. Y'all make this, so much easier for me, and please don't ever hesitate to try provide me with a suggestion. Absolutely love that. Um, I stay so focused on doing research. I got a new book today. I'm not gonna tell you what it is yet because I don't know if it's a good one. I've already found one error in it. I didn't even get off the first page, and I spent 2 hours doing research off of things that were covered on the first page. I think it's a good book, but I did find an error on the very first page. So that's, concerning to me, but the overall message in the book is still good. I just don't want to, um, present it to y'all if there's gonna be multiple errors in it. So I'm gonna spend the next couple of days kinda going through it. It may be a great follow-on. It's more back history on how all of this came about. So, but only if it's a good book. And again, we're, not halfway through the 2nd volume, but we're getting close. If y'all have a book that you're interested in, if you've not read it or if you have read it, if you have any questions, I have a ton of books I've already read that I'm lining up for us to review. But if you have any suggestions at all that you think would be relevant, please don't hesitate to send them. Post them on True Social, post them on Twitter, wherever you're, at, and I will definitely get them and, read them myself, and if I think they're worthy of us doing a book review over, I absolutely will. So, anyway, thanks very much for being here, and I will see you Thursday night.